Kicking off at number 5, The Dumb Witch Horror. Written in 1928 and first published in April's issue of Weird Tales, the awesome American horror fiction pulp magazine that featured the likes of Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard, and of course, Lovecraft himself. The Dumb Witch Horror is a vivid display of atmospheric horror and a slow burn that weaves its way around the Cthulhu mythos while always keeping its cards close enough to its chest. The Dumb Witch Horror focuses on the character of Wilbur Whately, the horrific humanoid spawn of the alleged witch Lavinia Whately, and no other than the outer god Yog-Sothoth himself. Since birth, Wilbur matured at a disgustingly rapid rate, reaching manhood within a decade. He is described as goat-like, half outer god and half human, and a being that stank of death and decay. Well, as we soon realise, Wilbur isn't the only child of Lavinia and Yog-Sothoth. He has a twin brother, the Dumb Witch Horror, a secret kept deep within the bowels of their familial home. The Dumb Witch Horror cemented the locations of Miskatonic University, Arkham, and Dunwich itself into the canon of the Cthulhu mythos, important places that make up Lovecraft's bizarre universe.
Coming in at number 4, we've got The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval. Remember the horror at Red Hook? Yeah, most of us would rather forget. They can't all be winners, can they? For all of the lastingly terrifying stories Lovecraft wrote, there were some that he just couldn't make compelling, or largely coherent, or not horribly xenophobic. Thankfully, over 90 years later, Victor Laval retold the story with some new elements to make it both fresh and palatable. The Ballad of Black Tom mirrors a lot of themes and elements originally present in the horror at Red Hook, but this time presents them in a different light. Much more flattering one too. It tells the tale of Tommy Tester, Brooklyn-based supernatural hustler and musician. By taking on a little side gig involving some Necronomicon adjacent deliveries, he ends up embroiled in a scheme involving the Great Old Ones. As things get dark, the story switches to the view of Detective Malone, who some will recognize from the source material. Providing an additional viewpoint and revisiting some of what made Red Hook so scary to begin with, this is a smart move to keep things interesting. By taking a look at 20s New York with all of the benefits of being alive in a modern era, Laval is able to pen a smart and topical retelling of this story. It compares cosmic indifference to racist malice and brutality, and even though some see it as a direct rebuttal to Red Hook, the Ballad of Black Tom still manages to get some terrifying cosmic horror in. Somehow, and I know this might seem a little crazy, it finds a way to connect the inhumanity of the universe to the inhumanity of people. Definitely an interesting way to interpret Lovecraft's work.
Swinging in at number 3, The Shadow over Innsmouth, which is a Lovecraftian story that really gives rise to the whole fish people kind of vibe. If you're a fan of the deep ones or unwittingly corrupted by them, in which case I'm terribly sorry for you, then you'll find some comfort in this tale. The Shadow over Innsmouth lays the foundation for some of Lovecraft's more well-known themes, the idea of an ancient aquatic race, the deep ones, the esoteric order of Dagon, and of course Cthulhu. But more importantly, it permeated the idea of a remote, isolated society that practices bizarre occultist rituals. It's an idea that gave way to the likes of the Wicker Man and the City of the Dead, and Lovecraft's stories managed to thrive in bleak isolation. I'm not gonna lie, this story has a pretty existential ending, more in the sense that humanity has no real sway over the more powerful beings at play. As Lovecraft emphasized in the opening sentence of the Call of Cthulhu, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. Next up at number 2, The Dreams in the Witch House, which perhaps isn't the most obvious choice, but oh my Cthulhu, this one is great, and testament to Lovecraft's unrivaled ability to tell a terrifying straight-up horror story. There's some real star players in this one too, even alluding to Azathoth himself and his dark throne at the center of chaos. If you're looking for a resolute Lovecraft story with a distinct beginning, middle and end, then look no further, and I'd suggest The Dreams in the Witch House to anyone wanting to start out in the Cthulhu mythos. It focuses on the character of Walter Gilman, a genuinely likable narrator and a curious student of mathematics and folklore at the Miskatonic University in the titular county of Arkham, Massachusetts. He rents a room at the allegedly haunted Witch House, a place which once harbored Keziah Mason, an accused witch who disappeared mysteriously from Salem in 1692. Witch House manages to weave genuinely creepy folklore tropes with what he does best, cosmic horror, and he does it in such a natural way that it quickly and very viscerally takes you off guard. Great stuff. And finally, our number 1 spot at the Mountains of Madness, which in all reality is the real benchmark for any science fiction horror ever. At the Mountains of Madness is a freaking incredible display of everything that Lovecraft represents. Ancient mystery, cosmic forces at play, blended with science and rational thought, all from the human perspective, and the stark reality that nothing you do really matters when you're staring down a cosmic behemoth. I really don't want to spoil anything for this story because the final reveal is the heart of the horror, and as with all things H.P. Lovecraft, there's never any happy endings. If it's any consolation, Guillermo del Toro has been trying to make this into a feature film since 2006, but it's been delayed time and time again due to del Toro's insistence on it remaining true to Lovecraft's form, which, may I add, is a fantastic thing, because originally James Cameron was going to make it in 3D with Tom Cruise attached as a star, which is all kinds of horrifying and not in the good way. In 2013, Del Toro stated that he's going to have one more shot at making it, and recently there have been stirrings of him being greenlit for a passion project, so seriously guys, fingers crossed. Kicking off at number 5, The Call of Cthulhu. And a lot of you guys were curious as to why this one didn't make the first part of this list, but for me, The Call of Cthulhu is perhaps the best entry to the Lovecraftian universe for any budding horror scholar. Yeah, I understand that if you're a serious top 5 scary fan, you'll know that we covered this story in our Cthulhu Monster Files video, so I guess you can call this one a double whammy. Written in the summer of 1926, The Call of Cthulhu is perhaps one of the most complex and ambitious narratives throughout his entire body of work. Lovecraftian scholar Peter Cannon remarked that it was one of Lovecraft's bleakest fictional expressions of man's insignificant place in the universe. Now, that's what I call an accolade. The intrigue from Call of Cthulhu comes from its almost panoramic narrative, encompassing a fictional documentary of sorts that weaves 3 separate narratives together that slowly make up the bleak realization of Cthulhu's existence. Now, I'm trying my hardest not to ruin anything, as a lot of the magic behind the Call of Cthulhu comes from personal discovery, but take that as a reason to read this one because it's some of Lovecraft's finest work, and it will have you feeling like a cosmic horror detective in no time. Coming in at number 4, The Rats in the Walls. And I absolutely love this story, so much so I've got no idea why it hasn't yet been adapted into a hit horror flick, because it's awesome. Although Wes Craven's The People Under the Stairs kind of alludes to it, it's not the same. The premise itself is nightmarish enough that you'd probably get the spooks just by reading the blurb. It focuses on the last descendant of the Delacour family, an American who, following the death of his only son during World War I, returns to England to his family's ancestral estate, Exham Priory, a cursed place that the locals are fearful of. Always a sign. While our fearful narrator soon discovers the real reason why his family's ancient estate was abandoned, he learns that his family maintained a cavernous underground city for centuries where they raised entire generations of human cattle to supply their taste for flesh. Eventually it was stopped when Delacour's great-great-grandfather killed his entire family in their sleep and left the country in order to end the horror. What a good guy. And yeah, the story doesn't really end there either, it gets worse. So much worse. The Rats in the Walls is an absolutely incredible demonstration of horror in literature, and if you haven't, you should read it. Swinging in next at number 3, The Colour Out of Space, which for me has one of the most awesome horror endings in all of Lovecraft's work. Don't worry, I won't spoil it, and we'll leave you a link so you can read it out for yourself. In The Colour Out of Space, once again, we head back to Arkham, Massachusetts, Lovecraft's fictional New England county, where the majority of his best work was set. Again, as is usual with Lovecraftian horror, an unnamed narrator, a land surveyor from Boston, tells the tale from a first-person perspective of a mysterious wild land in the rural Arkham landscape, referred to by the locals as the Blasted Heath. Of course, in typical Lovecraftian fashion, the explanation for this particular heath being so unfortunate is down to the nefarious machinations of the cosmos. Poor humanity, we can't ever catch a break. The thing that makes The Colour Out of Space so horrifyingly unique is the literal weight that Lovecraft gives the titular colour, an alien life form which is only explainable by the human mind in analogy. Reading this horror short story is an experience in itself, and it was Lovecraft's incredibly successful attempt at trying to create a completely unique alien life form. It's one of his finest demonstrations of science fiction and horror, and it's widely inspired the genre as a whole. Next up at number 2, The Shadow Out of Time, which in many ways is a story based on H.P. Lovecraft himself and his incessant, overwhelming feeling of not quite fitting into society throughout the majority of his life, as well as drawing stark parallels to Lovecraft's own father, Winfield Scott Lovecraft, who displayed eccentric behaviour during a 5-year period of madness. It makes sense then that The Shadow Out of Time tells the tale of the Yith, an extraterrestrial species with the ability to travel through space and time that can possess the bodies of unfortunate humans, inducing producing visions of strange cosmic vistas while simultaneously living their lives through the ages. Written in 1934, The Shadow Out of Time tells the tale of Nathaniel Wingate Peaslee, a professor of political economy at Arkham's Miskatonic University, and perhaps one of Lovecraft's most fully formed protagonists. The scope of this story is absolutely massive, and it traverses some of the highest concepts in cosmic horror. But it's in its small referential nuances that makes The Shadow Out of Time so damn good and creepy. It's genuinely scary and serves as almost a codex to Lovecraft's work, effortlessly tying together some of his most terrifying themes while managing to keep the horror to a personal level. If you can't tell, it's great and you should read it. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, The Whisperer in Darkness. While some of you may not agree with the order of our last 3 spots on this list, I'm taking a little bit of a liberty in putting this story at our top spot, because in my personal opinion, The Whisperer in Darkness is the best demonstration of how perfectly bleak and unstoppable the dread of science fiction horror can be. And it culminates in a brain in a jar. Because for me, there's nothing more terrifying than falsely finding humanity in something that is far from human. Published in 1931, The Whisperer in Darkness is a story told by Albert N. Wilmarth, perhaps one of Lovecraft's most iconic narrators, whose family name is regularly referred to in Lovecraftian fiction. Wilmarth is a professor of literature at Miskatonic University in Arkham, who begins a correspondence with his fellow folklorist Henry Wentworth Akeley about the mysterious goings-on in the isolated foothills of Vermont. Again, no spoilers, because going into this story with no idea is the best way to experience it. We'll leave a link down below. It also references Lovecraft's magnum innominandum, the great not to be named, the mysterious, all-powerful entity that lingers in the shadows of his cosmic horror fiction. And on second reading, there is much more to this story than what first meets the eye. Give it a read.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Vasterion by Thomas Ligotti. A good place to start when trying to find cosmic horror outside of the established granddaddy's work is with Ligotti's tale of a man driven mad by his love for a book. Seems like a lot of Lovecraft fans may find parts of themselves here. Vasterion is a short story from the collection known as Songs of a Dead Dreamer. The anthology is split into 3 parts: dreams for sleepwalkers, insomniacs, and the dead, with Vasterion taking up residence in the 3rd. All the tales in Ligotti's collection are clearly influenced by cosmic horror, with each part becoming darker. The tale we'll discuss plays on the cliche that every book has an ideal reader by introducing us to Victor Kirion. Victor loves his dreams, so much so that he'd rather be asleep than awake. These aren't lovely flights of fancy though. They are dark, warped visions of a reality that's fallen apart. He refers to it as a beautiful land of shadows. Not everyone's cup of tea, but Mr. Kirion is happy. Soon he comes across a bookshop full of seemingly boring tomes, but a strange dark man brings him to the back and introduces him to a volume detailing the world of Vasterion. This place reminds him so intensely of his dreams that he has to have it. There's no way he can leave without this book, for it speaks to him on a deeper level than he could have ever imagined. Commentary on literary cultists, maybe? The folks so obsessively devoted to their literary gods that they'll defend that relationship jealously or even religiously. Once Kirion takes the book home, his dreams begin to change. It seems like an outside influence has come in and infected his perfect world. Things aren't exactly what they seem, and madness is waiting just around the corner.
Next up at number 4, the music of Eric Zan, which I know that for many of you, the music of Eric Zan is considered one of the most beautiful demonstrations of H.P. Lovecraft's proficiency for prose, and I would have to wholeheartedly agree. And I'll do you one better and leave a link below if you haven't yet read it. Written in December 1921, this short story is pretty much the cosmic horror version of Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, which is also one of my favourite movies of all time, so go figure. Lovecraft himself considered the music of Eric Zan one of his greatest accomplishments, and what plays out is an atmospheric, slow-burning crawl into the abyss. The story itself is narrated by an unnamed student of metaphysics who, struggling financially, rents a place in a mysterious neighbourhood known as Rue d'Orsel, in which is suggested to be Paris, although it's never fully revealed. There, he meets a mute German viol player named Eric Zan, who plays weird, indescribable cosmic harmonies in his attic apartment that may or may not be the abyssal music of the Endless Void. As per usual, I don't want to ruin anything because there are some incredible twists and turns in what is essentially a 3,000 word story, but the thing that makes the music of Eric Zan so successfully haunting is what it suggests in its ambiguity. Give it a read. is awesome.
Dropping in at number 3, we've got The Cipher by Kath Koja. Ah, the 90s. Home to some of the best book covers of all time, bar none. Thankfully, it wasn't all just for show. There were some good stories between the covers. In her debut novel, Kath Koja takes a weird hole in the basement of someone's apartment building and makes it an existentially terrifying, disease-ridden read. Originally titled The Fun Hole, I wonder why that was dropped, this book will take a look at a doomed couple. Nicholas and Nakota should not be together by any means. They're both full of venom and hatred, but something keeps them coming back. I guess it's the strange hole in the storage room that they're both unhealthily obsessed with. This is another thing that shouldn't be there. But the fact that it's unexplainable and somewhat explorable through the use of 90s video capture technology makes it impossible to ignore. It pulses and exudes an era of wrongness, and somehow this manages to be magnetic. Could be a commentary on both the characters and their life choices. I'm terrible for being drawn to horrid media? Nah. If the characters and subject matter don't disturb you, the prose will. The Cipher is written to make you upset at every turn. It reeks of disease and cancer. Odd sentence structure, hypnotic pacing, malignant terrors within the fun hole. This is a magnificent piece of otherworldly terror. Plus, Koja somehow managed to write this while taking care of her young child. Maybe that's what inspired the extreme darkness. Cruising in at number 2, we've got Blind Sight by Peter Watts. Fans of hard sci-fi should have their ears perked up right now. Oh, and folks with an interest in nihilism too. Maybe people who like their fiction very, very technical as well. Has this piqued any interests? Perfect. Blind Sight is a first contact story involving artificial intelligence, space vampires, and 9-legged spider things. Very cool. It opens with some choice phrases like, if we're not in pain, we're not alive, and you will die like a dog for no good reason. This gives you a pretty good idea of what direction the book is heading in. By addressing themes like identity and consciousness, Blind Sight makes readers wonder if they're even anything at all. It's cosmic in a more universal sense. It doesn't necessarily anthropomorphize or idolize the uncaring forces of the universe. There are no great ones or outer gods here. Instead, the universe just sorta is. There's a spacecraft known as the Rorschach that seemingly communicates with the humans aboard the Theseus. Not exactly subtle names here, but they work. The Rorschach appears to be deliberately making attempts to correspond with the Theseus, but later on it's made clear that it may not actually know what it's saying. The beings on board, though, have abilities beyond the scope of humanity and operate on a level beyond our comprehension. They don't really care about us, and we couldn't possibly understand them. You see where this is going? While a lot of hard sci-fi can get overly technical and difficult to parse, Watts does a commendable job of making it accessible enough for folks who are entering from other literary spheres. And for every big idea, there is a big scare to go along with it. But just don't expect that everything will wrap up in one tight little package. And finally, at number 1, we've got The Croning by Laird Barron. By introducing the often hard to visualize themes of cosmic horror to a doomed love story, Laird Barron finds storytelling gold in The Croning. It's the tale of a man desperately in love with his wife who is deeply involved with something occult. The children of Old Leech, if you will. The big twist, though, is that our protagonist, Donald Miller, is in the early stages of Alzheimer's. He and his wife have been together for decades, and he's followed her around the world as she sought out strange and supernatural events and objects. The plot bounces back and forth between Don in the 80s, full of life, totally cognizant of the strange events happening around him, and Don now, confused and amnesia-stricken. By dealing with the amnesiac trope in a different way, the audience is presented with some extremely effective dramatic irony. As we move between the time periods, readers become more aware of the danger Don is in and how deeply entrenched his wife is in the cult. However, as he recalls details from his past, he also forgets due to his condition. He wants to believe that he's just imagining things and that the supernatural beings aren't real, and thanks to his lack of permanent memories, they seem to be just a silly story that he's misremembering. But the threat is real, and everyone but Don knows it. Creative in its execution, terrifying in its delivery, The Croning is a shining achievement in modern cosmic horror literature.